Hello everybody, how are you doing? Thank you everybody for making it through the rain and the train strikes and all the other tribulations of the age to get to DX Shots. Thanks so much. I'm Andy Curry, I'm the Managing Director of LION+MASON. Just to introduce who LION+MASON are, we are a team of UX experts. Basically what we do is we help organizations of all sorts of shapes and sizes, all sorts of different industries, understand who their users are, what their needs are, what their behaviors are, and we help them design products that are going to truly meet those needs and truly solve people's problems. And we do that through all the usual fun stuff: user research, strategy design, product design, service design, user testing, all of that good stuff. And we do it for all sorts of different people. But I'm not going to sit here and give you a great big sales PowerPoint. What I am going to do is talk to you about something that I feel very strongly about, which is I love field. Now, what do I mean by that? The actual long, boring title of my talk is How Field Research Can Transform Projects in Amazing Ways. But a slightly more succinct one could be Get Out of the Office. Now, I don't have to explain to many of you here, I'm sure the various different user research methodologies exist. We've got, remote testing and interview, lab testing and interview, workshops, desk research, analytics, tracking, field research. Or as I learned years after having actually done it for quite a long time, there's names for it, more formalized names, ethnographic research, and various other different forms that people can describe to that. Now, that's great, but that is, in all of my experience of doing all sorts of these different types of things, it's always been the case that I love field the most. I do. I love field. And let me explain why. Because there are so many reasons why I think it is often underused and under-executed, and yet I find it the most valuable form of research that you can possibly do for so many reasons. Things like epiphany moments, unfiltered view, empathy, getting out the office, and ethics, and I'm going to go through each one of these briefly. So let's start with epiphany moments. Now, what do we mean by epiphany moments? Now, when you're working on a project, and it can come at any stage in a project, it can come at the discovery, it can come right at the end, it can come during a testing session, and it can come through various different methods. But it's those moments when you suddenly think, hold on a minute, that key turns in the lock, and you go, oh my God, that's how we should be doing this. That's how we should be doing this. That's the thing that changes the entire landscape of this project, and it's going to make it work. Sometimes these can happen at multiple times. They can be triggered by huge amounts of things. But I have never had more epiphany moments than I have had when conducting research out in the field. And that's what I mean by field research, when it's out there in the field, observing users, where they are using those products, and observing the rest of their lives that happen around that, observing the environments in which they are existing whilst they are engaging with your product. Or if you're designing a new product, whilst they are struggling to complete the tasks that they are currently struggling with, that your product could possibly kind of fix those problems. So again, it's about going out there and seeing that. Now, I've conducted this on a number of different projects. There's one specific one where I have it always in my mind. I worked on a project for a large pharmaceutical organization, and that organization, they had this idea. They had this ordering platform for pharmacists from across the whole of Europe. And this was an incredibly old-fashioned platform. It was very antiquated. It just really wasn't delivering on what it needed to be. It looked like a 1990s website. Now, what they asked us to do is they said, we want you to redesign this. We want you to turn it into something that uses e-commerce best practice. We wanted to turn it into something that uses all of those good tricks, like banner ads inside of there. We want special 2-for-1 offers. We want the whole categorized like Amazon. We want to make it the Amazon of pharmaceutical ordering. We were like, okay, right, we understand what you're saying here. But actually, we think you need to have some understanding and analysis of truly what is that going to be what's going to resonate with this particular audience, these pharmacists. And actually, they agreed with us. They were like, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so what would you do? So we planned quite an extensive set of research, and that involved us traveling to a number of different European countries and observing pharmacists of different types. The little cupboards in the walls that you find in some cities, right up to the kind of the more rural ones, where it's kind of great big palatial kind of estates on the outskirts of villages, and including the ones that were incredibly advanced, where they actually have robot arms moving around, dispensing the medicines, and all sorts of different places in between. And I like to say it in the way that I traveled to some of the most beautiful cities in Europe, and I sat in pharmacies for a very long time. I didn't see anything at all glorious about them, but it was fascinating. And some of the details that we saw whilst we were observing people ordering, whilst we were observing them engaging with their own customers, whilst we observed them engaging with the day-to-day of what they were, of what the pressures that were incumbent upon their lives, we started to really gain a picture of what that was. And there were so many points when we were thinking, hang on a minute, if we went ahead and we actually just built this Amazon of pharmaceutical ordering, if we did this categorized search function, for example, one thing I noticed was whenever someone places an order, whenever one of these pharmacists placed an order, they would get a printout from an EPOS system. This would be at their tills, and this till would be printing out, and it would tell them what they needed to order. And they would pick that up on a piece of paper, and they would literally physically carry it to a back room, and this almost happened in almost every situation. They were very rarely connected up. To carry it to a back room where they would open up a little laptop and they would start typing into this laptop, they'd log into the ordering platform, and then they'd start reading the first item and then find it in the ordering platform, and then read the second item and find it in the ordering platform and add it to their order, bit by bit by bit by bit. There were sometimes 200 items on this piece of paper. Now, had we built a system that categorized everything into nice, neat little buckets like you do in Amazon, and you know, maybe those categories weren't what people necessarily understood, that means every single time someone takes an item off that list, they're going to have to go into this system. They're either going to have to type its name in the search bar, or they're going to have to go into the category. Now, is this decongestants? Decongestants, okay, decongestants. And there it is in there, and try and find it within that. Now, imagine doing that for 200 different items. That's a phenomenal amount of time. And we actually did know that they currently were setting aside hours to do this task because they knew how laborious it would be. So rather than actually making something that was going to be categorized like Amazon, one of the first things we realized in this moment, one of these epiphany moments was, well, why don't we just make the first view, the default view of the ordering page, A to Z? Because one thing we noticed was every one of these printouts was an A to Z list. So we turned the first view into an A to Z list. And then we tested it. And it meant people were going, that, there, that, there, that, there, dum, 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 dum. At the same time, we also worked into, you know, they didn't have to jump into a product. Like in a normal e-commerce experience, you know, you choose your product from the listings, you go to the product page, you add the details and the numbers. We tried to make that in line in this single page again because we realized these people were hugely time poor. These people couldn't spend the time to do an e-commerce system, and they weren't interested in doing that. Likewise, they weren't going to be able to use basket upsell systems to increase basket size because they weren't making business level decisions at that point. And this is what we had to go back with from what we observed. We understood from observing people in these pharmacies, in all of the different pressures that they had, that we understood that these people weren't shopping. They were ordering, and it was a task that they had to do alongside 1,000 other things that they had to do. And so actually this had to be turned into a super streamlined ordering platform rather than this Amazon of pharmaceutical shop ordering, as they said. So we also found dozens and dozens and dozens of other things just by observing these people, just by sitting back and watching them engaging with people, which also led us to be able to actually say to the client, well, actually, you know what you need to do is you need to support them in so many other ways. They could also go off to a wholesaler and order from you instead, but to use your platform, what are you going to do to keep them there? What are you going to do to bring them there? They are poor in so many other ways. They are currently under huge pressure from different legal restrictions and constraints in different countries. They're being treated like, being asked to basically perform as shopkeepers when that's not what they do, and that's not necessarily what they know, but that's another part of their jobs. They're being asked to almost act as replacement GPs in many countries, including our own. So what can you do? You can support them in that. You can provide them with education. What do they need? They need help with that. They need help with being shopkeepers, visual merchandising, the business kind of thinking behind that. They need help with the legal side. They need help with the compliance side. This is what you can do, and you can help support them. And they liked that idea, and they were like, yeah, actually, that works. And again, it's all from seeing people in the wild. We could have interviewed people remotely. We could have interviewed people over the phone, or we could have run some testing with existing platforms and things like that. And I guarantee you, some of the stuff, that A to Z list, the paper list, would never have been mentioned because it's just a natural part of their everyday life. People don't think about so many different things that they do. They just do them. And they won't mention them because they're just insignificant to them. But when you watch somebody do something, that's when you go, that's something real, that's something big. So, it's those epiphany moments. That's the first part. Unfiltered view. I think there's something about field that provides a really unfiltered view. By the way, who knows what Schrödinger's cat is? There's a few people put their hands up, which means people can later call me for misrepresenting Schrödinger's cat completely and drawing the wrong conclusion from the story. But for anyone that doesn't know what Schrödinger's cat is, it's a hypothetical thought experiment. Actually, I've even got that written down. 1935, Erwin Schrödinger. There you go. The basis of the experiment is that there is a cat in a box, and inside that box is also an isotope, and the isotope will either decay or not. If it decays, it releases a cloud of gas. It breaks a vial and releases a cloud of gas, killing the cat. Now, the box is sealed, and because there's a 50-50 chance of the isotope decaying or not, there's a 50-50 chance that the cat will be alive or dead. But you don't know whether the cat is alive or dead unless you open the box. And it's only when you open the box that the cat is alive or dead. When the box is shut and it's not been observed, the cat is neither. Now, does anyone want to correct me on any of that in any significant way? There's a lot of reasons for that thought experiment, apart from being cruel to cats. There's a lot of reasons for that thought experiment, of things that thought experiment can make people consider and think about. It's a very interesting one. But one of the things I've always thought about is a lot of it can talk to and lean towards this idea of until you observe something, or the act of observing something impacts it. And that's never more true than when you're conducting research. When you're conducting research with people, you impact the findings. You're not just seeing unfiltered views. You're not seeing the raw, natural nature of somebody when you test something. And there's lots of different examples of that. So when you test with a usability testing service, so you might have a remote unmoderated testing, and you might think, okay, these are the types of users, and you type in your details about the types of users that you want, and you think, oh, they're close enough to who I need to be. But how many of those users are really, truly the real users? When you go out and do interviews, even lab testing is a perfect example. I did do some lab testing earlier on in my career, and actually I always found it massively, massively artificial, even though it's trying really hard not to be. It's almost trying too hard. I've even seen people build whole lounges in labs and stuff like that. And the idea being that, this will make it more comfortable and make it more like a real world situation. And we'll have multiple devices and people will be opening packages in front of us. And they're doing that, but they're all doing it in a lab. But the idea being that that's going to make it less biased and more of a naturalistic view of the real world. But it's not. It's wildly uncomfortable for the people involved. They've literally come up a flight of stairs. They've been paid to be there. They know that glass mirror screen has a bunch of people from the company on the other side of it. It could not be more artificial. It's the observation that will change their behavior, and their behavior will not be what it would be normally out there in the wild. And there's various other examples you can think of, but this is why I really think, when you go out and you see something in its natural habitat, look at that, look at that. Isn't that magnificent? When he's just nestling there in his natural habitat and observing something like that. Now, there's bias even when you go out and you conduct ethnographic research. There absolutely is. You can't get away from bias. You can't get away from inflicting a bit of bias upon what's happening when you're assessing something, when you're measuring something, when you're observing something. Your very presence there might change how someone behaves because they're going to know you're there in many cases. But you can do so much more to mitigate that, I find, when you're out in the field. You can do so much more to put people at their ease. You can make yourself Switzerland, present yourself as not somebody who's going to do anything. You can also distance yourself, literally in some cases, just literally step back and observe and spend hours watching things. And it's those little moments, like if you're talking, you can chat and you can interview someone who's like working in a shop about the system that they're using. But then if you step back and just observe and they turn around and start dealing with a customer, that's suddenly a lot more authentic. That's a lot more real. And I think you see so much more reality. You see so much more of an unfiltered view in those situations with field. Empathy. This is another one. I think this is wildly important. Obviously, I don't think anyone in this room is going to disagree with the idea that empathy is a huge part of what we do. It's a valuable part to actually have an understanding. It's not the only thing, but it needs to be part of your understanding of your user. And actually, I believe that fostering empathy for users and an understanding for users, not just for us, not just for people working in product design, but from any area inside an organization, is wildly valuable for people. In terms of creating products that are genuinely going to impact people. Oh, you, me, we. But it doesn't have to be as saccharine as that. An example I've got of that as well is a project I did really, really early in my career. This is like pre-smartphone. This is pre anyone even having a phone. Almost, even at this time, it wasn't necessarily the case that everyone even had a phone in their pocket. But I was part of a team that was looking to create a new piece of training material and a method of training what were called in the brief disaffected youth, training them in IT skills, basic IT skills. But how could we reach disaffected youth and train them in these IT skills? Now, the consultants that actually had got this brief and hired us to do this, they were, let's say, dismissive of the user base. But they'd had some ideas of their own, and they knew who disaffected youth were. They were quite sure they were ignorant. They were quite sure that they were, they're good for nothings. They've got no motivation. They know nothing about computers whatsoever. They've probably never seen one. So how do we approach this thing of getting some IT training into their thick heads? That was basically the attitude that they had. They'd already had some ideas, though. One of those ideas was this gigantic pillbox style device. It was going to be like a pub quiz machine, great big touchscreen thing there, cemented into a street corner in some deprived areas, and disaffected youths could come up and use this machine. And the consultants literally almost, the way they described it to us, it was almost like they were describing like monkeys staring at the monolith in 2001. It was horrendous to hear them talk about this. But they thought, and they can use this machine and they can play with it and they can learn, and it'll be their first experience of touching computers. And we were thinking, well, this sounds, We need to do some investigation about this, we think. So what we actually did, we went out, we got involved with some social workers. We went to some of the most deprived areas of Yorkshire. We went to social clubs. We went to people's houses. We went to doctors' surgeries. We went to all sorts of different places, and we met with these so-called disaffected youths, and we discovered some amazing things. We discovered that, one, they weren't thick. Surprise, surprise. They weren't unmotivated. They were just pissed off, and they hadn't got opportunities. They were fascinated by computers, though. They were fascinated by them. Many of them knew people who'd had computers, and they would go around and use them as often as they could. One girl, it turned out, didn't own a computer, but probably had higher skills on it than I did. She started saying, I actually like hacking, but don't tell my mum and dad. But some of the people, I mean, again, it was really eye-opening to actually be there, see these people, and we walked the areas that they lived in, and that only gave us a glimpse. I'm not saying suddenly I deeply understood the character of a child from a deprived area. Of course I didn't. That's ridiculous. But what I did do was have a completely new and accurate, I think far more accurate perspective of who these people were and what we could do for them. But what I also found was I had a passion inside me that actually suddenly thought, we can help. We can do something about this. We can communicate this to the rest of the team, and we can talking to these people, talking about these people as if they're not just personas. They're not just these kind of just random people that are in the brief. But they're real people. We've looked them in the eyes. We've talked to them about their problems, the challenges, the hopes, the dreams, and things like that. And they've become real people. And we want to do something to help these people. We want to make this product work, not just rake in a bit of investor funding from it. So it becomes a really interesting thing. Incidentally, we talked to them about the pillbox idea as well. It was great. We showed them some of the mock-ups and things. That wouldn't last 2 minutes on my street. That's a really stupid idea. And my favourite, I'd probably smash it up myself out of principle. Deeply offended by it all. However, what we did discover was that they just wanted access. They wanted to know where they could get to where they could actually get to computers, where they could access the internet, so they could try it, so they could just experiment with it. And I said, oh, well, you can get on the internet in libraries. Like, there are computers in libraries? Suddenly I had another epiphany moment. I realised we don't need a multi-million-pound EU-funded project to start building pillboxes that aren't going to work in deprived areas. We need a poster campaign that says, there are computers in libraries. And again, from going out and finding that empathy and finding that picture, seeing those people in person with our own eyes, we suddenly realised we need to tackle this in an entirely different way. Again, another example of a situation in which being out in the field, doing that kind of in-person research really transforms your perspective and the rest of the team's perspective. And that's an important point, actually. Getting out of the office is another quick one, by the way. All those other things are the most important points, but getting out of the office is a really important one because actually these days it's getting out of your own home. Because in many cases, we might be sat there with our Sharpies and our Post-it notes and our best practice and our whiteboards. and be thinking about all these good things. We might be doing some remote testing, which is great. We might be doing some remote interviews, which are also really great, and we found actually are fantastically useful, and can actually put people at a great deal of ease because they're often sat in their own homes at the times when they're doing them. So sometimes that's even a better solution than sitting in front of someone to interview them. But I digress. Getting out of your own home and your office is good, not just from a project perspective, but from a personal perspective. You know, don't fence yourself into this little kind of corner. The world is exciting and interesting, and it's inspiring, and we need to get out there, and we need to start looking around. You know, you go and travel. Travel is great. Even boring travel. You know, you can go to Huddersfield train station. Don't go to Huddersfield train station, unless you have to. But Huddersfield train station, in the right mindset, you can really enjoy things like that. If you've got a brain, and the type of brain that likes understanding humans and looking at them and working out how they tick and why they do what they do, then anywhere you go when you're traveling can turn into some sort of Alan Bennett-style observational experience, where you can just say, why are they doing that? What are they doing that? It can be fascinating for that. And travel's fun. It's good for the soul, even if you go to Huddersfield. Sorry for anyone who's Huddersfield. I don't know why I picked out Huddersfield for this one. But also, you can become a connoisseur of terrible hotel rooms. This is some recent. Well, no, this was a few years back. Someone had upholstered the ceiling, and the furniture looked like it was from the set of Hellraiser. I have no idea what was going on in there. But you can become a connoisseur of shit hotel rooms. It's great. It's part of the experience, and it's good for you. It's good for you to start finding it and exploring it and seeing the world in all its weirdness and strangeness and glory. And I think that makes us better in whatever profession we do, and it makes us better as people. Ethics. Finally, this is the final point, ethics. Now, it's fair to say there are a great deal of people for whom ethics is merely a county just north of Suffolk. And I'm glad there were at least a couple of giggles to that joke. My wife will be very proud of me for saying that. But still, there's nothing, I think, I've definitely been in a situation, I'm sure many people have as well, where there might be some senior stakeholders who are actually trying to steer you in a certain route because it might make short-term commercial benefits. People who start talking about kind of what you might call dark UX patterns or manipulative patterns. Things that are trying to they're trying to inflict upon certain product designs or certain systems or service designs because they make more business sense than they do, but they actually impede the user. And I think one of the things is it's very hard to kind of push back on that sometimes, especially when it comes from above. But if you take people with you on this journey of bringing people out, looking their users in the eyes, again, what I have found in my experience is if you can share what you've done, and even better, if you can bring them along to them to see. We've done this so many times, we've actually brought people who are from senior stakeholders to actually come and see their users for real, in the wild. It's massively impactful because suddenly they find it an awful lot harder to start justifying why we should just do this quick, lazy, bad, and sometimes ethically wrong decision. And actually, when they've looked someone in the eyes and they know the names of some of the people who they're actually making these for and the real problems that they have to experience, it's much, much harder. But you also find people suddenly become a lot more proactive in finding a solution to reach the goal that the unethical or dark pattern might aim for. But actually what you can find is they suddenly start thinking, well, let's find a way that works. Let's find a way that doesn't do those things, but actually still that doesn't treat our users like rubbish, but actually still can get us to that goal. And people work at that a little bit harder to find that if they have that empathy, if they have that understanding of their users. And again, I think that getting out there and actually seeing people for real is it. And it's mad, really. That's what I'm talking about. Go out and see things for real. Don't just sit there behind screens. Don't just sit there with remote testing. Don't just sit there with those types of things in there. I think they can be useful in their cases. But that's my summary, really, is I love field research because of the massive amounts of difference and sometimes absolutely transformational differences it can make to projects. And thank you very much for listening.